In this episode, we talk about the mysterious death of prisoner Kenneth Trentadue and how this investigation breaks open and exposes the possibility of a network of radicals involved in the Oklahoma City bombing, which you have probably never heard of.
In the dark shadows and in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and bold. April 19th, 1995. At 8:55, an ex-Army Desert Shield vet named Timothy McVeigh and another man are seen by many witnesses heading towards the Murrah building on Northwest 5th Street in a Ryder rental truck. The truck parks at the Murrah building at the drop-off for the building's daycare center. On the sidewalk at 9:01 a.m. the two men get out of the truck and walk away. The security cameras on the Murrah Federal Building capture this. At 9:02 a.m. the Ryder truck containing 4,800 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, nitromethane, and diesel fuel detonate in front of the north side of the 9-story Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. The buildings in a 16-block radius were affected by the blast. The blast was equivalent to 5,000, it says pounds, but I think it's tons of TNT. It could be felt up to 55 miles away. It registered at about a 3.2 on the Richter scale. Until 9/11, this was the deadliest terror attack in the history of the United States. And to this day, it remains the deadliest incident of a domestic terrorism in the country's history. 168 people were killed. 680 more were injured.
The Abracast, occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Abracast. Hey, in studio today we have Erin Fleming from Redrum Blonde. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so the idea is, like, I have the Oklahoma City bombing stuff on lockdown.
Good.
But I felt like I wanted to have you come in to talk about the true crime kind of aspect to the part of this, and you have a ton of notes, so I'm really appreciative for your time. Would you like to talk a little bit about your podcast and where folks can find you?
Sure. It's a true crime podcast, so I try to do it weekly, and the format's it's pretty open. It's solved and unsolved stuff. Sometimes it's famous cases. Sometimes it's, not so famous. I like to do stuff from Pennsylvania. Not a native of Pennsylvania, but grew up, relatively close. Your cat is awesome.
It's like as soon as the record button hits,
I'm
here it
telling
comes.
you, that's what it is.
So, where can they find you?
I'm on all kinds of formats. My main platform is Acast, is who hosts me, but I'm on iTunes, Stitcher, what's the one that no one, Spotify. I just got on Spotify, the one that no one can get on. Finally got on that.
That's
so,
awesome. Yeah. I'm on Spotify as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was able to get on there. So I love your show.
I love your show.
Well, thank you very much. We were talking.
Aww.
I like it because, well, first of all, I like the personality of it is really good, and then I like the cases that you choose too, and the straight kind of forward way that you put it out. So I do appreciate it. I want to give you some props. You got to get the fuck out of here.
Oh, your cat is great.
Yeah, I guess that's a word for it. All right, so you ready to get into it?
Absolutely.
All right, let's get into it. Okay, so the prevailing theories right off the bat of the explosion were just similar to the World Trade Center, just 2 years prior to that.
Yeah.
And there was also the FBI also had this wild theory of a Mexican drug cartel striking the federal building. So those were like their two biggest things. Now it's very interesting that both of these theories include foreign nationals.
Yeah.
And there's, even to this day, there's a big conspiracy theory thread of foreign nationals and people from people have this theory that the Chinese helped bomb the Murrah building. And the reason is it's all tied into Bill Clinton. Like, they were like, okay, so
wow.
there's a law that if a sitting governor is under investigation, they can't keep the evidence in the Capitol. So all of, like, the Mena, Arkansas stuff and all the Whitewater stuff were taken to the nearest federal building that wasn't in Arkansas.
Okay.
And that would have been there. So, there's, and plus all the people that are like the Clinton body count people, well, they're all over this stuff. So this theory that, the foreign nationals theory, you get deeper and deeper into all this, the foreign element, it seems to wind up bearing a little bit of weight. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little while, because there is this interesting note of when we get into the issue of John Doe number 2, and then they hang out in this place called Elohim City, and in Elohim City there's a German national named Andy that lives there. So it's like all these white supremacist, like, separatists basically are living in this like little camp called Elohim City, and there's this German national that lives there and was able to escape while being investigated. So
that's bizarre.
Yeah, it's really wild. What's the guy's fucking last name? Andy Straussmeyer, or Andre Straussmeyer. Even when we get into the Jesse what's the guy's name? Jesse Trudeau.
Oh God, what is his name?
Well,
I like how we've both forgotten his name.
Well, when he starts his investigation, which we're going to talk about, he actually contacts Andy Straussmeyer. And,
the brother.
The brother of the guy.
Okay.
Okay. So the third theory is that anti-government right-wing extremists bombed the federal building. So to put this in a little bit of context, Ruby Ridge happened in 1992, and then Waco happened in 93. And it's arguable that both of these events were illegal in huge stretches of the federal government's, action and the jurisdiction. And, someday I'm going to sit down and do a Ruby Ridge episode, and, I'm going to sharpen my fucking pitchforks and get my torch out. So, we're not talking about politics right now. We're talking about policy. So Bill Clinton had taken the gun control issue as a major issue in his first term, 93 to 97. He had lobbied for and signed two major pieces of gun control legislation. He signed the Brady Bill, or the Handgun Violence Protection Act, and in 94 he signed the Federal Assault Weapons Ban, or the Public Safety and Recreational Firearms Use Protection Act, which limited certain semi-automatic firearms and restricted magazine capacity and so forth. So these guys really overreacted to all of this stuff. You know, they get like wound up, and this is when, you know, the Michigan militias start like, you know, making videotapes and all of this kind of stuff. This, and they were getting, they also got wound up over Ruby Ridge, and the Waco massacre debacles fueled all of this kind of heat for the Clinton administration. It was all, their worldview was shaping their actual politics. So when accusations and questions were being asked, you know, about like the Lewinsky trial and all this stuff, like Hillary famously got up there and was like, it was a vast right-wing conspiracy, you know, and like the people that listened to Rush Limbaugh were like, oh, well, Rush Limbaugh is this vast right-wing conspiracy, but you know, people that were paying attention to this gun control debate and all the militias and stuff were on their radar. They were like, oh, that's the vast right-wing conspiracy.
Exactly,
you know?
yeah.
So based on dozens of eyewitnesses, two sketches were produced, John Doe number 1 and John Doe number 2. These are the two guys spotted in the Ryder truck the morning of the Murrah building explosion. We all know John Doe number 1 turned out to be Timothy McVeigh. The thing looked real spot on. Like, I mean, it was pretty close.
Yeah.
So back to the day of, McVeigh gets out of the truck and he moves north through Oklahoma City in a zigzag pattern to Northwest 8th Street. So the Murrah building is on 5th Street. So this is 3 blocks away. He's moving in a zigzag pattern northernly. Excuse me. He was getting to his getaway car, which was stashed there. And it was a 1977 Mercury Marquis. And it was yellow.
That kind of stands out.
Yeah. And it's just like, well, so the fact that he had a car stashed and was coming from the opposite sides kind of speaks to like accomplices anyways, right? So within 90 minutes of the bombing, McVeigh would be arrested in his getaway car. He was pulled over by cops for operating a vehicle without a license plate. So if you're like, you know, my wife loves live PD, and you will never like these live PD guys. These cops will be like, I'm going to pull this dude over because his tail lights out. And then they wind up finding like 5 briefcases full of cocaine. And you're just like, if you're breaking the law, make sure your fucking car has a license plate on it. Right.
Yeah. It's kind of unbelievable. Sometimes how people get caught, it's so dumb. Like, you know, I just talked about Ted Bundy, and he was just like such a bad driver. Like, you know, like get your shit in gear, you know, if you're going to commit a crime in any way. Yeah. If you're going to like do something on this level, you can't get a license plate.
Yeah. If you're going to blow up 700 people, you know, why don't your getaway car have a goddamn license plate?
Yeah, you know, they had a list somewhere of like things to do, and like somewhere on there should have been get a license plate. Like, hey, what if we get pulled over?
Yeah, and the idea, like in my brain, and you know, I'm not making fun of the bombing or the people that got hurt or lost their lives,
not at all.
But you know, like in my brain, he's driving on the highway, listening to like Creedence Clearwater Revival, like tapping along, you know, and the cop turns his lights on, and he's like, oh fuck, you know.
It's just so funny sometimes though when you like think of people doing things and then like they just do daffy moves. You know what I mean? Yeah. Just something so stupid. Why couldn't you remember that? A license plate. Good Lord.
Yeah. I mean, because it's not just like, hey, I'm on the run from blowing up a federal building.
It's pre-planned.
I don't want to, hey, I'll make sure I have a license plate on my car because I don't want to deal with fucking cops when I'm trying to get to work.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
We're two Joe Schmoes, but we both have license plates.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
We
I don't
haven't
want to get
bombed
pulled
any
over.
buildings.
Yeah, for real. Good Lord.
So he gets arrested. He gets arrested for operating a vehicle without his license plate. And when the cop pulled him over, the cop was like, "Hey, do you have any firearms on you?" And Tim McVeigh was like, "Well, yes, actually I do. I have an unregistered revolver here in the car." So they take him into custody. The state trooper's name was Charlie Hanger, which I made a note of it because it's like, that's a cop's name.
That
like,
is a total
It's
cop's
like an
name.
80s cops movie, and they're like, "Hanger, get in here. You're a loose cannon."
He was born to be a cop with that name.
So he had a concealed weapon. And so they had the guy, but they did not tie him to the bombing yet. Like, they just had him on this bullshit weapons charge, and the fact that he was driving a Mercury Marquis, a yellow 77 Mercury Marquis. I mean, it's just like such a movie. It's like a Quentin Tarantino thing.
It is.
Like,
yeah.
A yellow late 70s wannabe hot rod with this fucking dope, driving in it. So 2 days after the arrest, McVeigh was identified as John Doe number 1. So they, I can't remember exactly how they linked it to him, but it had something to do with the hotel room he was staying in. So he registered okay, I remember. They found the VIN number of the Ryder truck on the axle. So they found the axle of the truck and they found the VIN number. And they were able to they went back to Ryder and they were like, "Hey, your fucking truck exploded. Can you let me know who rented this truck?" And he had the weirdest alias. He called himself like Robert Kling or something.
Nice.
Yeah. And they're like, "Why did you pick Kling?" And he was like, "Well, it's the Klingons, man, the bad guys from Star Trek or something."
Great.
So they were able to trace to the hotel he was staying at, and he stayed at the hotel under his real name or something. I can't remember exactly how it worked, but so what happened is they served a search warrant on his dad's house, and they found a bunch of his personal effects and people he had been talking to. So eventually they were like, "Hey, we already got this guy. We have him on a weapons charge, and he's in Oklahoma." Again, you're just like, if he had a fucking license plate, this guy could have bounced to Indochina.
He'd be in the wind.
Yeah.
He'd be in the wind. We'd be like, we don't know who committed these crimes.
They would still be like, "It's the fucking Chinese."
Yeah.
So after the hearing on the gun charge, so they sent him to the judge for the gun charge, and on April 21st, 95, as soon as he got charged, the feds took him. They're like, "Now you're arrested for the bombing of the fucking Murrah building." On May 4th, 1995, the sketch of John Doe number 2 was published, and it launched a nationwide manhunt. Now, some people say it was the largest nationwide manhunt. I'm not sure, because there's been some pretty big manhunts, but it was a huge manhunt. Like, people were fucking looking for this guy. The feds rounded up more and more conspirators. They got Terry Nichols, who wound up getting life without parole. He helped build the bomb. And they got Michael and Lori Fortier for accomplices because of their foreknowledge. Now, they list Lori Fortier as one of his conspirators, but the thing is I don't think she was a conspirator. They got Michael, and he flipped. And when he flipped, part of his deal was when he got out of prison, he and his wife were going to go into the the witness protection plan. Because who wants to be next door neighbors with the guy who fucking knew about the Oklahoma City bombing and didn't do anything about it?
Yeah.
So he's in the wind, both of them. They're both in the witness protection program right now. He served 10 years, and then when he got out, they went into the witness protection program. So he's probably literally my next door neighbor.
He probably is. He's probably there watching that Steeler game right now.
Yeah. Come on, Ben, do it. All right. And so what about John Doe number 2? The guy dozens of people saw in the Ryder truck with McVeigh in the morning of the bombing and subject of this massive nationwide manhunt. So I need to make a note here that the whole world's out there looking for John Doe number 2. And when McVeigh went to court for the bombing of the Murrow building, even though the feds took the security camera footage that was clearly on the front of the building, would have had awesome views of the truck and all the people that got out of it, that was never entered as an exhibit to as prosecution evidence.
That's weird.
And you're like, if you had the fucking guy who bombed it on trial, wouldn't you be like, hey, here's the security footage that shows him getting out of the fucking truck? So this lends a lot of credence to these John Doe number 2 people that are out there. Like, how come no one's ever seen this video? Now they go back and Jesse Trudeau will tell you that the feds say that they've lost this footage.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make a point there that no one's ever seen this. There's records that they took it, but no one. There's actually an interview online from the people that worked at the photo lab that duplicated the footage. So they said, "Here, make copies of this tape." So the guy.
So it exists. It's there.
Somewhere, and there's multiple copies of it.
That's really weird.
Yeah, and you think that would be like, hey, here's exhibit fucking like number 1. You
Yeah,
know?
case closed. Here we go.
Here's the guy. He gets out of the truck.
Yeah.
2 minutes later, the fucking truck blows up. Like,
it's really strange.
Yeah.
That's like a big red flag right there.
So, because of this next move, the FBI eventually decides that John Doe number 2 didn't exist. He never existed. He was a figment of everybody's imagination. So that the fact that the tape was never showed as an exhibit really begs the question of like, why? So,
something's up with that.
Yeah. So this is the stuff where I think we should get into Kenneth Trentadue, the Kenneth Trentadue stuff, because I think this is where his story kind of picks up.
Yeah, this is interesting, and I hope I don't get long-winded about this, but so
we have time.
So there's a guy, Kenneth Michael Trentadue. Just your average guy. He was born in 1950. He grew up really poor in a place, where was it? Cucumber, West Virginia, between Cucumber, West Virginia and Horse Pen, Virginia, and a coal mine camp. And I guess his family is really poor, came from a family of coal miners. It said his both his grandfathers were coal miners. One went in at the age of 6, the other at 12.
They start working at the coal mine
at
6 years old?
At 6 and 12. Both died of black lung, and I guess his father also had black lung. Now, I can identify with this because I'm from West Virginia.
Okay.
And it's a coal mine state,
Yeah.
so, I understand.
What part of West Virginia are you from?
I'm from close to Wheeling. I'm from Moundsville.
Okay.
It's notorious for the penitentiary
Right.
and the big mound. But it's close to Wheeling. But it's kind of like a cheat because it's so in the upper panhandle that, we kind of escaped all the other things that go along with West Virginia.
Yeah.
It's not like deep down there. I think this was like
I'm sure, yeah.
pretty deep down there. Yeah. So, being from there, what it's like to depend on the coal mine. Like, that was your only way to get a good job, even when I was growing up. So he was growing up, it was around 61 because of coal prices fell after the Korean War. The whole family picked up and moved, and they moved with another family to Orange County, California, clear across, the other side of the country. So he was a normal guy. He went to high school. I guess he was a track star, but he had some kind of injury, so he ended up quitting track and dropped out of school. Then he enlisted in the Army, but I think he's a guy that's just kind of like a fuck up because then he became addicted to heroin. I kind of feel for him. Like, you don't have the best path for success, where he came from and everything.
Yeah, and he actually went to Vietnam, right?
I don't know. I don't know this. I tried to find out more information about this, and there was so little about his high school years and being in the Army.
Okay.
That was all I could find out, was that he was in the Army and that he became addicted to heroin. So I don't even know, like, when he got out of the Army or anything.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty...
All right. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, you're supposed to interrupt. No, you're not interrupting. We're conversing. So then he tries to have like a normal life after that. I guess he gets a factory job and he goes into carpentry. But then also I couldn't find out any information about how this began. He started robbing banks. But he didn't use a real gun. He would take the firing pin out or he would leave it empty. And I don't know much about guns. So.
Okay.
But he was caught, as happens with bank robbers.
So it's important for later in the episode to realize this guy served in the military.
Yes.
And that he is a bank robber.
Yes.
Because it ties into how this all ends up.
It does. And also his appearance, which we'll get to later on.
Okay.
So he ends up getting a 20-year sentence. He serves 6 and is paroled in 1988. So then after he gets out, he tries to have kind of a normal life again. He's like, maybe he's trying to straighten up. He gets married and he ends up having a kid in 1995. But something happens that kind of throws everything off track. So he's on his way from Mexico, and he's going back home to San Diego. And this is June 10th, 1995.
So he's married to a Mexican national.
I believe so.
Yeah,
yes.
he's down there visiting her family in Tijuana or something.
Yeah. Yeah. So, he's coming back. And it was another one of those things where it wasn't like a big deal. They just ran his plates. It was the same thing. Found out his license was suspended and that he had parole violations. So... okay, so he gets arrested. So then he gets transferred to the Department of Justice's Federal Transfer Center, which is in Oklahoma City. Now, this is all pretty much like 2 months or so after the Oklahoma City bombing. So, things are probably pretty on edge. And he got sent there just for the parole hearing, and that was why it was there. He talked to his brother on the phone. His brother's name is Jesse, and we'll hear a lot more about him later.
He's a lawyer.
He's a lawyer. His brother said he sounded, quote, chipper. They talked about, the parole hearing coming up, kind of strategized about that. Nothing was out of the ordinary. And then things kind of go to hell. As well, death, kind of like downplaying that. So he's not there long. He got there, I think, August 18th and then August 21st of 95. It's, he's in a cell. It's 2:38 in the morning. There's a cell check and everything's normal. At 3:02, he's found dead, suspended from a noose made from bed sheets in the ceiling. So, okay, what is going on? This guy's... his brother just talked to him. He's normal. He's just, an average guy. He's been in jail before. It's not like being in jail is freaking him out. He's waiting for a parole hearing.
It's actually a transfer center. It's not even technically like a prison.
A prison, yeah. So that's what was so strange. So he's found dead. But right away, people think it's kind of odd. They say it's a suicide. Supposedly, there's like a note in pencil scrawled on the wall, a suicide note. There's a journalist named James Ridgeway, and he said, he's not buying the story. So supposedly, they want you to believe that this guy hung himself. He fell. He bruised his head and his body. He didn't successfully kill himself, so he tried again. First he tried to slit his throat with a toothpaste tube. And then he finally hung himself. So this is what...
This is the official story.
This is the official story. This is what they're presenting to us, which is really strange.
I never heard of a person slitting their throat with a toothpaste tube.
I haven't either. And I thought, I don't know. I'm really square. I don't know much about being in jail or prisons. But I was like, I guess you could do that. I don't know. It's
reminds me of like Aquafresh, like the tin, like they had like the tin toothpaste tubes at the time.
It would burn to do that. Can you imagine?
It's like mentholated toothpaste in there.
But I mean, it is something. I work at a bookstore, so people come in and they want to mail things to prisons, and I guess you can't send hardcover books.
Yeah.
you have to send paperbacks because, apparently you can make a weapon.
Right.
So I thought, I don't know. I'll give it the benefit of a doubt.
Okay, all right.
So, the oddest thing that happened next was the warden called Trenadue's family and offered to have the body cremated at the government's expense. And everywhere I read about this, they said this is a very unprecedented move. And luckily, the family declined. They were just like, no, what the hell?
Well, to hear Jesse talk about it, they actually had to take legal action to stop them from doing it.
Yeah, it seemed pretty intense that they were pretty like, let's get this guy, get rid of this body. They finally get the body from the morgue, and it's in horrendous shape. There's ligature marks. There's, bruises all over him. There's, his head's all jacked up from where he supposedly fell when he tried to hang himself. So essentially, right then, his brother, Jesse, says it looks like he was tortured to death. There were 3 heavy blows to the head. His throat was cut. And the odd thing about that is that they noticed it looked like a left-handed, like if someone were left-handed, but he was right-handed. So that's another thing.
How do you think that they could tell that? Is it like the depth of where it starts versus where it ends?
I think it is. Because I've seen this on a lot of forensic shows. It must be, I'm trying to think, like if you think about it. Yeah, think about like where you cut, you would probably make the deepest.
Where you start.
And
then trail off, sort of.
Yeah. And then it would probably be lighter where you end up.
And who knows what that toothpaste tube is doing this whole time.
burning the shit out of your throat, man, because, ew, toothpaste tube. I mean, that's something I should have, researched, because is this a thing? The toothpaste tube.
I don't know. I never heard of that. I've heard of people making shanks out of all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And never once had I heard about a toothpaste tube because, so to your earlier point, if it was a prison, you have to go through the prison means, I guess, or get your packages inspected. It can't be a dangerous toothpaste tube. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They would be like, hey, this is tin. We're not going to let this come in. So what kind of fucking toothpaste tube could this be?
I mean, back in '95, were there dangerous toothpaste tubes?
Somewhere there's a listener listening to this and being like, yes, don't you know about the great toothpaste, tube controversy of 1995?
Somebody in prison right now is like, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, hey, we just gave him some shitty ideas.
I'm going to make a shiv and then it's going to burn because there's going to be toothpaste on this. I don't know. Anyways, so, they get this body and, I guess it was so bad and so in such bad shape that his brother said that people went to the funeral and went outside to vomit. I can't even imagine.
Part of his story about all this is that when they got the body, even though they were going to cremate it, when they received the body, it was heavily makeup.
Yeah.
There was I don't want to say Bondo. I don't know what, I don't know what they would use besides that, but Trentadue says that he's got to peel the stuff away to see the breakages in the or the bruises or whatever in the skull.
Yeah.
So, for him, at least as far as his story is concerned, it goes to this is part of the cover up.
Yeah.
They couldn't burn the body, so they had to fucking make it up
yeah.
He wasn't beaten to death or whatever.
He's fine.
Yeah.
Just some makeup. Really? And that would be disturbing, number one, to hear that your loved one has supposedly killed themselves, but then to see things that make you say, okay, if you're killing yourself, why is there ligature marks and why are you all bruised? And
one of the, I don't know if your research had this, but one of the videos, one of the interviews that he's done said that the bottoms of his brother's feet were bruised.
Ew, that's weird.
And they're like, why would the bottom of his feet be bruised? And then someone was like, oh, well, in Vietnam, that's a form of torture. You would traumatize the bottom of the feet, to make people talk.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, that's rough, man.
That is.
Your fucking feet, the bottom of your feet. So I didn't know if you had that in your list or whatever, but I thought that was interesting because it's like the only time you'll hear him is Jesse talking about it, and then you're like, well, maybe it's like the blood pulled weird, or I don't know, but giving him the benefit of the doubt, like the bottom of bruised feet, is pretty crazy. Like in the Inquisition and in the Middle Ages stuff, they would like, hold your feet to the fire. That's where that term came from. They would like cook your feet while you were like, So, I mean, maybe that's like merit or whatever. I don't know. It's weird though. Like
weird.
Having a corpse with bruised feet is
That's when you really I mean, okay, so if you're going to go with the angle that this is not a suicide and there's bruises all over, even on your feet, that's pretty jacked up.
Yeah.
That definitely points to something. Yeah, if I'm in Jesse Trenadue's case in his shoes, I'm going to say, "Hey, my brother's been murdered." Yeah, it's pretty obvious at that point.
Yeah.
So I don't think, and him wanting to look into it kind of starts some trouble. The day after the death, there was a chief investigator of Oklahoma State. He was the medical examiner named Kevin Rowland. He filed a complaint with the FBI saying that there were irregularities in this death. There were a lot of weird things that then went on. I guess the coroner was not allowed in the cell at first. And then, I think I'll mention this later, the cell was washed out before a proper investigation was even performed. Which, okay, that's odd. Right there.
So it's like if just one of these things were odd, it would be like odd.
Yeah.
But it's like piling up, right? Like there's so much stuff that's weird in this one specific case that just piles up.
And it goes on and on and on. 2 days after the death, there's a press release by the Bureau of Prisons, and they declare that it was a suicide by asphyxiation. But the suicide, the whole thing was not consistent with what the medical examiner found. And he said that it looks like he was actually tortured. Hence, like the feet, all that stuff, the ligature marks. Then there was some FBI paperwork that was found from an agent who looked at the medical examiner's reports, and on these papers mentioned murder and that he believed that foul play was suspected in the matter. So right away, it's very suspicious. They had a whole board of inquiry that was convened. I guess when there's a suspicious death in a prison, that's what they do. Once again, I don't know what goes on in prison.
You're pretty vanilla, you said.
Yeah. And I keep looking at you like you're going to tell me like some prison inside material.
No, I was in jail once, never prison. Like,
really?
Yeah.
Nice.
It was just a holding cell. It was a DUI thing. It was 25 years ago.
Yeah, I'm so square. I don't know. I've driven past a jail. But,
Hey guys, every mainstream show this month has an extension on Patreon for the $5 tier. The week 1 extension episode is the House of Air wands. It's an extension of the continuation of the tarot card series. Week 2 extension is the Battle the Battle of Tours, which I've been threatening to do for quite a while. It's an awesome show. The extension for week 3 is Metaphysics of Sex Magic, the Kundalini Homunculus, and the Curse of Pasiphae. And the extension for week 4 is the Patriot Conspiracy. The Patriot Conspiracy. And just like always, the $3 tier has all of this month's mainstream shows available for commercial free right now. The whole month of January is available right now. Thank you guys for the support and for listening. Thank you. Oh, a portion of all Patreon support donations and ad revenue goes to helping us send books to deployed servicemen and women overseas. We call it Tomes for Troopers. This month we were able to send out this female was looking to get a whole collection of the Songs of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones book. So we were able to provide them with Dance of Dragons. I was pretty excited about that. And shout out to Marie and Heather and also my old man for donations this month. Thank you very much. Thanks for the support.
So then this was another really odd thing. So the attorney in charge was ordered to treat his findings as, quote, God, I can't read my writing, attorney work product. And this meant that there is a legal distinction that would protect anything that was found out in this as it would keep it from a lawsuit or from the Freedom of Information Act inquiries, which that struck me as really weird.
That is weird. And like this story is going to evolve into a FOIA story.
Yeah.
Like it becomes all about Freedom of Information Act,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. You know, things were redacted, but that's, you know, further on. So basically, they say even to this day, the FBI, the Bureau of Prisons, and Department of Justice won't even discuss this case, which, okay, that's weird too. So then I want to get into this here. So it's kind of the reconstruction of the death of what went on. So the documents say that around 3:02 he was found hanging in his cell from a bedsheet. Stuart Lee, who was the official in charge that night at the prison, apparently refused to unlock the cell while he waited for a video camera to film the body.
Okay.
So it sounds like, you know, they're going to do everything official, but kind of odd he wouldn't unlock the cell. He said Trentadue was dead, so he wasn't concerned with taking immediate action. Okay, weird, but a prison medic then said on several different occasions that he tried to do CPR, then later admitted that he didn't. Okay, weird. Video was never made or was erased. And that's another thing in this case. There's a lot of evidence and information that disappears and pops up or is never seen again, you know, and kind of ties into the Oklahoma City thing too. Photos were taken, but they weren't allowed to be given to the family. Then, no, that was it. When the family asked for photos, they said they couldn't find them. And then later on, these photos reappeared in the files. So
It's crazy.
Yeah. Not that I'm a big fan of the FBI, but man, like, okay. His clothes vanished, and then other evidence that they would have looked into, like the bed sheet that he supposedly hung himself with.
They wound up painting the cell.
Yeah. That was weird, too. They, so later on, they talk about, like, handwriting experts and everything. Supposedly, he scrawled a suicide note on the cell in pencil. And then this was painted over. It was painted over before anyone took any kind of evidence.
Yeah.
They painted the cell over. The cell was cleaned by 2 p.m. the day of the death before any kind of official examination had been made of the cell.
So let's just put that in like context for just a second. Like, okay, so there's been, we'll call it a suicide.
Yeah.
We'll call it a weird suicide. You know, just having the throat slit and then the hanging is weird enough.
Yeah.
And so I imagine that because they're in federal custody, they all need to get investigated, right?
Definitely.
So it's like, I imagine, like in my brain, I imagine Quincy going to do a fucking a death scene investigation, and the like the warden of the penitentiary or whatever, the guy that's in charge of this transfer center is like, sorry, Doc, you know, we've already cleaned it. It's already been painted.
Yeah.
I imagine Quincy would fucking go nuts.
He would lose his shit. He would be like Sam. Wasn't that his name? Sam?
Yeah.
I just like that you bring Quincy up. I haven't even thought about Quincy. Think of like Columbo if he went in.
Yeah.
He would be like, he would leave and he would be like, oh, excuse me, just one question. Why was the cell cleaned?
Yeah.
That's weird. That's weird even, like you say, for a suicide.
Yeah.
There should be an investigation.
Especially
even straight up suicide.
Especially if any kind of death, if the government is involved.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it seems like you said, like Peter Falk would be like, all right, I'll see you later. And then he'd come in and he'd be like, wait a minute, why'd you paint, what could have been on these walls if the fucking dude hung himself?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
and here's my question. Where's the fire? Why do you have to do this? It's a cell. Can't you, just let it go for a while?
Yeah.
And then come back to it,
Yeah. It's certainly strange.
That's
I believe
fishy.
it's certainly strange.
Yeah, that's really fishy. But let's see. Yeah, the walls were painted over, and this was supposedly where the pencil scrawl was. The family later on had a lawsuit, and in that lawsuit, they discovered that another person's blood was found in the cell, and that there were no cut marks on the noose when the prison official said that they had to cut him down. So that's another weird thing.
Yeah.
Just inconsistencies. You say, is this just people not getting their stories right, not paying attention, or people trying to cover their tracks? This is when definitely I started saying to myself, this is fishy. This is weird.
Yeah.
Because I do like to go in skeptical. I don't like to, be handed a story and totally believe it. But it's
right.
like, yeah, okay. Yeah, even there's not cut marks, Then there was an internal FBI memo where a prison guard told his neighbor, because this guy apparently had loose lips, that that he was killed and then hung in a cell as a cover-up. So, okay, this is what his brother suspected. But I think his family at first you have to go back to this, the whole thing. The family did not know at this point anything. At this point, there's no
clear tie to
anything.
To either side of this podcast right now.
Yeah,
from the
right
story
now.
that I started with to the story that you're telling, people are like, what the fuck does one thing have to do with another?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you'll soon find out. Also, inmates reported hearing similar statements, and they were warned to keep silent about it. One particular inmate was sent to isolation. There's a guy named Alden Gillis Baker. He was an inmate there, and he wound up giving Jesse's lawyer a note at one point, and he described an incident in which he said Trentadue got into an altercation with a guard, and then additional officers went into the cell. And he said there were a lot of officers in there, and then there was a lot of physical violence going on. He then heard what he said was a faint moaning and the sound of bed sheets being torn. He told this again in a deposition, but a judge ruled that he was not a reliable witness because I guess the guy was a convicted robber and a sex offender. Then around 2000, the same guy that told this story was himself found hanging in his prison cell.
This is a theme.
It is a theme.
It's going to echo at least one more time in this story.
It definitely is, because when I read that, I, skipped ahead. Not going to skip ahead in the story, but somebody else ends up found that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, supposedly, one of the things they said for washing out his cell was there was a rumor that he had AIDS, and I don't really even know how this came about, but supposedly he was going around and he was upset the day before talking about the inmates saying he had AIDS. So this was their excuse, I guess?
Well, remember that he was an intravenous drug user.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That does make sense.
Yeah. Just looking at the skeptical side of it. Like, maybe that was protocol for someone who had a history of heroin use or something.
Yeah, and I do try to put myself back in that time period. Nowadays where AIDS isn't the phenomenon that it was then. Mm-hmm. You have to remember, and I'm sure you remember, like, people were scared to death.
Yeah.
1995. It's like people didn't know much about it, so I could see and that I could buy. So I was like, oh, okay, and it kind of takes you out of the conspiracy for a moment.
Yeah.
That this guy might have been killed, and that maybe people were just ignorant and they didn't know.
But to recontextualize it, it does not explain the heavy makeup. It doesn't explain the rush to burn his body. It doesn't explain the the bruised feet or the other like cartoonish sort of hoops that they have to jump through, like the toothpaste tube and all that stuff.
Yeah. But I know you probably do the same thing. You try to stay like middle of the road when you read about something. You try to not dive into one side or the other. I like to be very skeptical and be convinced.
Especially with conspiracies, I tend on the skeptic side all the time, and it frustrates like people that are like, oh, let's listen to what John has to say about 9/11.
Yeah.
And then they get through my 9/11 episodes and they're like, this guy's a fucking shill.
But sometimes, you can't go all out.
Yeah.
I love conspiracies. Like, hands down, I love them. I love to read about them and everything. But, everything from Beyonce is... My friend told me the other day that there's a rumor that her and Jay-Z eat babies.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, is this an Illuminati thing?
Rockefeller.
Yeah. I love that shit. But I'm not sitting here thinking, oh, yeah, Beyonce, is she eating babies?
I wonder what she likes on them. Like, what kind of hot wing sauce do you put on a baby arm?
Like, I love this shit. The whole Paul is dead. I love conspiracies. I love them. But, I digress. So,
well, I think it's interesting that we had that little aside because it's like, I think that we both kind of fall on the weird side of this one.
Yes.
Where, I'm not saying that Andy Strassmeyer was wandering through the Murrah building planning explosives, which is what a lot of people think.
Yeah.
But I think that there's enough weird stuff to actually look at this and be like, this is wild.
Yeah. Yeah, because it doesn't end. Like, the more I read, the weirder it got. So there was apparently the FBI agent who investigated this whole thing didn't even go inside the cell. Apparently he didn't even go to the prison. He didn't talk to any inmates. He just talked to the officials there, which, wow.
That's solid
great.
Investigation.
Yeah. Yeah. So finally, complaints from the medical examiner's office went to the Department of Justice. And then this is when, they're trying to start an official investigation. So early on in 96, the Department's Civil Rights Division takes over the investigation, and they decide the case should go to a federal grand jury. I have not been drinking. So this is like 10 months after the death, the jury convened. And the case was being prepared in Oklahoma City, and this is about 3 years after everything happened in Waco. I mean, this was like a crazy hotbed time of weird things going on. The weird thing is, like, do you recall all of this very vividly? Or I don't know what I was doing in my youth. I don't recall a lot. I recall Ruby Ridge and Waco pretty vividly, but the Oklahoma City bombing, I'm ashamed to say that I don't know as much about it as I should.
I remember vividly watching Waco unfold.
Yeah.
And I was very frustrated because I was in Germany in the army at the time, and we'd only get the USO broadcasts.
Oh.
And I remember just being like, I don't understand this at all. Like, I don't understand any of it.
Yeah.
And then I was still in the army, but I was in Seattle when the Oklahoma City bombing went off. And it's just like, you get a bunch of bored soldiers in the room and something like this happens. The first thing is like, they're going to send us to fucking Oklahoma,
Excitement.
Yeah. It's like, they're going to send us down there. Like, we're going to be hunting this motherfucker down. And it's like, I remember just being like, just, you're just in shock. It's like, there's just like, it gets into the zeitgeist of like everybody. And just like now, it's just like, people are spinning, the theories and all this stuff. Like we started the show off with, like, the big, there's a Middle Eastern connection. It's like, well, people were like, well, the World Trade Center bombing just happened in 93, so it's wild the way things change, but they all kind of stay the same. Like whenever like a mass shooting happens,
Yeah.
like everybody spins off, and they all have
Yeah.
their own ideas what's going on with it.
That's true. And I remember the one thing I do remember, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, with Oklahoma City bombing. Why am I talking like I'm drunk? Like Foster Brooks. Do you remember Foster Brooks?
No.
From the match? No, not the, Hollywood Squares. Do you remember
Hollywood.
that show?
Yeah, yeah.
And the guy in the middle, and he'd always talk like he was drunk. But so didn't they really keep talking about that there was a daycare center in the building?
Yeah, when McVeigh parked the Ryder van, he actually parked it in the loading zone for the daycare, the drop-off zone for the daycare center. So it's like where the van was parked, like right underneath it was like the outcropping of like the first floor or the second. It would have been the second floor, I guess,
Jesus.
or like lobby first floor, and it was basically like right underneath the daycare center.
Yeah.
And when you go and you look at, if you just Google search Oklahoma City bombing and flip it to the images, probably one of the first things you're going to see is there's this infamous now or famous picture of a Oklahoma City fireman carrying like this dead fucking toddler out of like the wreckage, and you're just like, wow, you know, it's just like that's the kind of stuff. That
is the one thing I do remember, and I don't know if it's I wasn't a parent at that time, but I don't know if that really stuck with me. But I also think they really brought it up a lot too.
Yeah. That's what like the media does. It's like it's emotional. So that's like what they're going to talk about. And you're just like, wow, like, like, why would you have you have a daycare center in the same place that the fucking ATF, they're keeping law rockets in the ups. They had it's part of the deal. They actually had an illegal armory in the building. The ATF guys did, and you're just like, why? It's like that's all hindsight stuff now. That's all post Oklahoma City bombing kind of stuff. Now it's like you try to get in a federal building. It's like trying to get into fucking Fort Knox. You know what I mean?
It's true. It's very intimidating. I totally don't know what I was talking about. Anyways, so there's this guy, the Oklahoma chief medical examiner. His name's Fred Jordan, and he just refuses to declare this a suicide. He has to sign off on it. He will not say it's a suicide. Eventually, the FBI is like one of the groups that really try to discredit this man, even though he was very well respected. I guess he was with the Oklahoma City bombing. He worked with the victims, and they said, he did a very great job doing that.
He worked his ass off because, so what they had to do with any kind of bombing is they have to collect all the body parts and figure out what goes with what. One of the weird things about the Oklahoma City bombing is they had an extra leg.
Really?
Yeah, they still don't know where this fucking extra leg came from.
What's that all about?
I don't know. I left it out of my notes because I was like, I'm not sure if it's relevant or not. And also, it's just like this weird factoid that I don't even have a theory about. But like, they matched everybody up, and like, they looked in the pile. They still had an extra leg. They couldn't figure out where this fucking leg came from.
That's insane. Like, what would that be? Was there any kind of like medical facility in that building?
I don't think anybody that would have body parts, but some of the John Doe 2 theorists are like, oh, that's the last remaining part of John Doe 2 is this fucking extra leg that's there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's weird.
That is weird.
It's like, well, after 9/11, for months they were pulling body parts out of like the sewer and out of the foundation and stuff, and you're just like, that's weird.
That is weird. Like, I can't even imagine doing that job. But this man, when he did it, he was very well respected. Now all of a sudden they're calling this man a loose cannon, which is weird.
He's like Charlie Hanger. He's the loose cannon.
They should have a TV show, Jordan and Hanger, loose cannons. So anyways, this guy, I don't think he was a loose cannon, but they're trying to really discredit him. And they're really pushing him to say that it's a suicide, even though he doesn't want to say it. He actually said that he thinks that this man was killed. They eventually, Department of Justice, they bring in another person to get a second opinion. It's a guy named Bill Gourmier. He's a forensic pathologist, and he also said he thought it was murder.
Wow.
So this is, two well-respected people saying they think it's murder. So it's not going the way Department of Justice wants it to go. So after about a year, the grand jury concluded that the investigation, and they didn't make any kind of indictments. So that's pretty disappointing. And then Fred Jordan said he felt harassed by the Department of Justice.
This is the examiner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then kind of inexplicably, he changed his conclusion to suicide. So this guy who'd been steadfast, I'm not saying it's suicide, I think this guy was murdered, all of a sudden, oh, okay, I'm saying it's suicide. So supposedly
I got these IRS audit paperwork in the mail. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's very fishy. And supposedly his reasoning is, he says, based on the handwriting expert that looked at the suicide note on the wall, even though the expert hadn't seen the actual suicide note, I guess if you can call it a note, Jordan would then later say that he still believes that Trentadue was beaten to death and that he himself was harassed by a Department of Justice from the very beginning. Which, yeah, I kind of feel bad for this guy. November of 1999, there was the last government investigation by the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General. The report is sealed. There's bits that have come out, but everything's been redacted. They found fault with the prison's response, and they said that employees of the FBI and the prison had lied. Then finally, in the late 2000s, the family brought their civil lawsuit. They were awarded $1.1 million for emotional distress, but the government appealed, and I think it's still up in the air. I don't think anything's been solved from this. So then this is when I got to go back in my notes, and then I'm going to stop talking because I think everything I've said is done. But so there was some very odd things that happened. So Jesse Trentadue is out there. He thinks there's something weird with his brother's death, but can't, what of it? So back in 1996, he gets his phone call from this guy who didn't identify himself, but he said, look, your brother was murdered by the FBI. There was an interrogation that went wrong. He fit a profile. Didn't say anything more, and Jesse Trentadue just kind of blew it off.
Yep.
Because what would you do with that? What do you do with that information if they don't give you any more?
So, do you mind if I take? Okay.
Yeah.
So, there's this reporter named J.D. Cash.
Yes.
Okay. So, So J.D. Cash calls Trentadue.
Yes.
And he's like this folksy guy. He just works in like a mom and pop newspaper in Oklahoma. The problem is that he had family members that were involved in the bombing. Mm. So he's like, he's passed away now, but he was like the dogged, like on the spot reporter for all of this stuff. He became like a clearinghouse where people had any information. They would just send it to J.D. Cash. Well, J.D. Cash called Jesse Trentadue and was like, look, man, here's what fucking happened to here's what I think happened to your brother.
Yeah.
So I'm going to flip to, God forbid, hell's freezing over right now. I'm quoting a Mother Jones article.
I know. And I have to say, this is where I got the majority of my information. And this article was really well researched. And yes.
Yeah. It's the James Ridgeway from Mother Jones, August 2007. So this isn't like flash in the pan, and it's not recent. Like this is like, it's got a little bit of age to it.
Yeah.
In the spring of 2003, Jesse Trentadue had all but given up solving the mystery. And then he got a call from a small town newspaper reporter in Oklahoma whose name was J.D. Cash. And he wanted to talk about Kenny, whose story and photo had been widely circulated on the intranet. What kind of vehicle had he been driving when he was stopped at the border? Did he have tattoos? And then Cash explained that he had gotten him... Then Cash explained what had got him interested. Kenny's particulars fit the police description of John Doe number 2. Some of the photos Kenny bore a clear resemblance to the police sketch of the alleged bomber. Both Kenny and John Doe number 2 looked quite a bit like another man, a bank robber named Richard Lee Guthrie. Guthrie's name meant nothing to Jesse Trentadue, but the far-right radical scene, he had some notoriety. In 94 and 95, Guthrie and his gang, the Aryan Republican Army, carried out an impressive series of 22 bank robberies across the across the Midwest, netting some $250,000 that they used to support the white supremacist movement. Skipping ahead a little bit, the Murrah building itself had been the target of white supremacist plot as far back as 83. Among those involved in the failed endeavor was this guy named Richard Wayne Snell, who was later convicted of murdering a black Arkansan state trooper and a pawn shop owner that he thought was Jewish. Snell was executed April 19th, 1995, the very day of the Murrah building bombing, and the final resting place of Snell's body would be a remote religious compound called Elohim City.
Interesting.
For those seeking evidence of a wider conspiracy in the bombing, the federal government's missed opportunities to crack it, all roads lead to Elohim City. So I'm just going to take a quick second to do a programming note. Every episode this month on the mainstream has extended episode on Patreon, and this PatCon is going to be the name. The Patriot Conspiracy is going to be the name of the extension episode for this, and it's deep into Elohim City. So if this is itching your conspiracy thing, like, catch up with me over there. The place was not much to look at, a clutch of small buildings in the Ozark Mountains in eastern Oklahoma. Skipping ahead, this article is long as shit, by the way.
Yeah.
For many years, Elohim City served as a sort of extremist sanctuary. Members of the Aryan nations came through. Skinhead bands made a visit, which when I read that, I was like, oh, I wonder if this is where that Green Room movie came from. Young recruits showed up at the gates, and this former Klansman who had been a leader of the white Aryan resistance had a trailer there. And there had participated in Andy the German or Andreas Strauss-Meyer's guerrilla warfare training. Imagine that. In the 90s, the burgeoning militia movement, which helped inspire McVeigh and Nichols, became part of the mix. Cash told Jesse that some people, including some in federal law enforcement, thought that the ARA might have been involved in Oklahoma City bombing. Again, check out the Patreon episode. It gets so deep into this, and you're just like, what the fuck? Guthrie could have been John Doe number 2. Guthrie, along the way with key ARA members, was finally arrested in January 96 and was reported to be cooperating with federal prosecutors tracking the far right. At that July, shortly before he was due to testify in court, he was found dead, hung in his cell. I got this other short thing here. This is about Richard Lee Guthrie. Suicide rocks white supremacist probe. The body of the admitted member of the right-wing group of bank robbers is found in jail cell. He had recently agreed to inform on extremist organizations. This is from Judy Pasternak and Stephen Braun. They're Los Angeles Times staff writers. This was from 1996. Just a little more than a year after the bombing. Chicago. An admitted member of the right-wing extremist group of bank robbers was found dead of an apparent suicide Friday morning in a county jail in Kentucky. Echo of an echo of an echo.
Yeah.
Jolting a growing federal investigation into white supremacist violence. The death of the 38-year-old Richard Lee Guthrie Jr. came little more than a week after his pledge, according to a sealed plea agreement in the U.S. District Court, to provide authorities with information about organizations, quote, whose goal is to overthrow the U.S. government or engage in domestic terrorism, unquote. And you're like, you know, I hope that the lines are starting to be dotted about this, because, you know, we actually totally missed the on the physical appearances, they both had the same. They both had a very similar tattoo on their arm.
These guys looked alike.
Yeah.
Because I said I want to see what each one looks like. So they were like 5'9", maybe. They said they were muscular, kind of like
both kind of barrel chested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both had mustaches. Their mustaches were exactly the same.
They had like with the big fluffy like Fu Manchu, like a walrus kind of thing.
They both, to me, look like Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec. Totally like Nick Offerman would play them.
Yeah.
So and I think they both drove trucks.
They both had the same. Well, Kenneth was borrowing somebody's truck, I believe, but it was like the same kind of truck. They both served in the same unit, although at different times in their military careers.
And the dragon tattoo
and they had a dragon
on their left arm. They each had one on their left arm. So this is weird.
Yeah, it's wild, man. And I mean, we're missing probably the biggest connection. They were both fucking bank robbers.
Yeah, bank robber. Like, this sounds like a weird Nicolas Cage movie, you know? Like, there's two guys out there. There's one guy, he's just kind of a screw up. He's trying to, like, get his life together.
Yeah.
You know, he's trying to be an honest man, and he gets caught up in something. Then there's his exact double, his doppelganger is out there with the exact same tattoo, the same features, driving a truck. It's kind of funny in a weird way.
Yeah, the one guy's trying to clean his life up, and the other guy's trying to overthrow the government. You know, it's so crazy.
They're bank robbers. Like, what are the chances?
Yeah. In his last known interview, a 10-minute phone call on Thursday, responding to a letter from the Times, Guthrie said he was planning to write a book that goes, quote, a lot more deeper, unquote, than the robberies, about his life as a white supremacist movement. Quote, it'll all come out, unquote, he said. Authorities said Guthrie's discussions with investigators covered a broad range of robberies. The other two men, Kevin McCarthy and Scott Anthony Stedford, also are being held in connection with the robberies. So this guy doesn't, a year or so after, he's not making this connection to John Doe number 2.
No.
But I thought that this served as good kind of background, especially when you find out the final disposition of both of these guys.
Yeah.
Or the official story is they're hanged in a fucking prison, hanging themselves in prison.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, is that the prison way to go?
I guess, I don't know.
I guess it is.
So we didn't really get into this too much, but here is the most fascinating thing about Jesse Trentadue's FOIA report. So the way that he fought this in court a lot is FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. So he would file FOIA requests for the Department of Justice or like the federal prison systems or whatever, FBI.
Yeah.
Well, on this weird, I don't even know what it is, but he filed a FOIA request to the CIA. Now, the CIA by law are not supposed to act within the U.S. borders against U.S. people, right? U.S. citizens. So it's not a law enforcement agency. It's an intelligence gathering agency that it can't operate stateside. However, so he filed the FOIA to the CIA, and they went back to the judge and they fought it. They fought the FOIA request, citing national security. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
It's so weird.
That is so weird.
That is very weird. And they couldn't even release, they stated that they couldn't even release redacted pages to Trentadue because that would be admitting how many pages of documents they had on this case. Now, this isn't it's not about Oklahoma City bombing, perhaps. Like, I don't know what his FOIA request was for.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that it's just for his brother.
Jesus. Yeah. It's not, and his brother who, was a bank robber, but supposedly worked alone, wasn't affiliated with anyone.
So they couldn't reveal how many pages of the documents they had. Oh, okay, so it was the Oklahoma City bombing. So Trentadue was like, his FOIA request was for Oklahoma City bombing. But however, that doesn't make it any less weird.
No.
Like, why does the CIA have anything to do with the federal building bombing?
Yeah.
Why would they have any pages at all, let alone they don't want to even release how many pages they have of it?
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, so that all ties back to the very beginning where we were talking about the foreign national connection in Andy Strauss-Meyer and in the fucking Chinese. So you're like wondering, like, what is it? What is it all about? I think that the CIA thing is, to me, the most fascinating part of this. What is your like final analysis of this whole thing?
It just brought up a lot of questions for me, because then in the end, you know, I started looking at the similarities between Guthrie and Trentadue, and then I started to wonder, did they ever cross paths? You know?
Yeah.
You have to kind of entertain that idea. I mean, they were both bank robbers. I don't know. You know, you start to wonder and look deeper into it. Did he maybe have some kind of inside knowledge? Maybe he knew these people. Maybe he didn't.
Yeah.
Maybe it was mistaken identity. I mean, it is weird. It just brought up a lot of questions.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild.
It is wild.
And you're just like, this poor fucking guy, he just basically got smoked in a place where he should have been at least safe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like
just
you said, wasn't prison. He's just in this transition center to wait for his parole hearing.
And it's all because he just looked like this other fucking dude.
Yeah, can you imagine? That's so crazy. I mean,
I do want to see Nick Cage play both of these people in like a Prince and the Pauper style takeoff.
Well, Nick Offerman would have to play them, but it is like a Nicolas Cage movie. It is so crazy. It's so crazy. It's like, how bad can your luck be?
Yeah.
It's so sad. And I think what's sad to me too is like right after he was arrested, his first son was born. Yeah. I was just like, oh man, I guess his son was named Vito, and I identify because my son's name is Vito. So I was like, oh man, you know, I tried to like put myself in his shoes, and like, this guy's probably like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
You know,
he just winds up looking like this guy who is probably John Doe number 2 in the Oklahoma City bombings.
And how can you look that much like someone to have a dragon tattoo on the same arm? That shit's crazy.
Yeah. Yep. So, well, do you have anything else that you wanted to get into, or?
Well, no, you know, I agree in the end too, that CIA thing. That shit's weird.
Yeah, man, I think that, like, out of all the weird stuff, like, if you ask me, hey, do you think that the FBI is corrupt? I'm like, probably.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Jesus God.
But I'm like, why is the CIA involved in this? Like, it's so weird, you know, and it's like that foreign national thing. Like, a few years ago, Glenn Beck went crazy about this foreign national connection to Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
And you're just like, I mean, he's a lunatic. You know what I mean? We're just like, well, whatever. But, you know, but then you hear about this CIA, like, how are they involved? And apparently, like, they actually had part of the spy satellite, part of the satellite network was involved in this whole thing somehow. And Trentadue, if you guys are interested, he does a lot of interviews on like conspiracy podcasts and stuff. So you can find that. You can find that on YouTube. That's where I found them. And he talks a lot more, you know, in depth on that sort of stuff. But that CIA thing, man, is a ball buster, because you're just like, wow.
Can you imagine all that we're
just funding.
Don't even know. You know, we don't even know an iota of what is really going on. Can you imagine if we even knew a bit of what really goes on, what really happened here?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to shed some light on it on that extended episode, like all about Elohim City and this thing called the Patriot Conspiracy. It's good. It's a mind bender. I tried to explain it to my wife, and she's like, "What are you fucking talking about?" And I'm like, there's court records. Like, it's insane. So, why don't you tell the folks about your podcast and where to find it, and we'll wrap this sucker up.
It's Blonde Redrum. It's Redrum Blonde. Good Lord, what am I saying? It's Redrum Blonde. Blonde Redrum is my Twitter handle. I'm on Acast, iTunes, Stitcher, pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast. I have a Facebook group.
Okay.
Which, you know, doesn't have too many members, you know, but would love people to join.
Yeah,
I'm not the biggest podcast. I'm all right with that.
Yeah.
But you know, I think I'm decently respected. People seem to say, you know, like, I remember reading one comment someone said, Redrum Blonde, she's all business. I was like, damn, that's it. That's all I want out of this whole thing.
Well, I love your podcast, and I want to
you.
thank you again so much for taking your time, for all the research that you did, and to come down here and bullshit with me about this wild story. I can't thank you enough. If there's anything I can ever do for you, please just let me know.
In the extended episode available on Patreon, cue the Benny Hill music. Let's take a look at the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the 90s and explore a costly pattern of inaction and incompetence. A pattern that led our supposedly incorruptible law enforcement agency to launch, help continue, and cover up a shocking series of terrorist attacks that cost the life of hundreds of Americans. A portion of all ad revenue, Patreon support, and donations go to Tomes for Troopers.
Red-blooded American. So the court says, well, let me ask you this, Mr. Brewster. A lot of this makes for good conversation. Like the trip to Oklahoma City, before the bombing and so forth. And it makes for sensationalism. And I don't know that it really has anything to do with Oklahoma City bombing, but I saw where you were coming from with that McVeigh trial going on. I don't want anything getting out of here that would compromise that trial in any way. Brewster, who is Howe's attorney, says, what do you mean by compromise? Do you mean share with the McVeigh lawyers? The court. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms took a trip with someone that said buildings were going to blow up in Oklahoma City before it was blown up, or something of that nature, and try to connect it to McVeigh in some way or something. Hey, thank you guys for tuning in, and thanks for all the support. Please remember to swing by and give us a 5-star rating and a good review. Hit up the mailing list for monthly bonus content and access to graphic components of the show when available. Every mainstream of the show this month has an extension on Patreon for the $5 tier. Week 1 is the House of Air Wands. It's the Tarot card extension. Week 2 is the Battle of Tours. Week 3 extension is Metaphysics of Sex Magic, the Kundalini Homunculus, and the Curse of Pasiphae. And week 4 is the Patriot Conspiracy. Just like always, the $3 tier, all of this month's mainstream shows are available commercial free. Right now, that's for the whole month. And a portion of all of our Patreon support, all of our donations and ad revenue goes to helping us send books for deployed servicemen and women, American servicemen and women overseas. This month, we sent out, someone was trying to get a whole complete collection of the Game of Thrones book, the Songs of Ice and Fire, so we were able to send them Dances with Dragons. I want to send a shout out to Marie and Heather for their donations, and also for my old man who donated for Tomes for Troopers. I like that. Thank you guys very much. And last but not least, please remember to check into abercast.com. The feature topic links are all up and running, I think. You can find links to social media there, and you can also check out some comic books or graphic novels if you're interested. Thanks a lot, guys. See you next week.